Okay, I'm Hillary Wiley, Springfield City Council.
Alan Zelenka, City of Eugene.
Lucy Vinnis, City of Eugene.
Sarah Maderi, City of Eugene.
Gary Wildage, Lane Transit District.
Bigger than everybody else.
Gary Gillespie, Lane Transit District number 5.
Bill Johnston, ODOT staff.
Brittany Brindle, ODOT.
Brenda Wilson, Lane Council of Governments.
Lynn Taylor, Minutes Reporter.
I'm Tom Boydell. This is my first meeting. Nice to meet everybody. City of Coburg.
Counselor? You're a counselor?
No, the new city administrator.
Oh, well.
Well, congratulations.
You're new.
I'm Patty Giannone, City of Coburg.
Petra Sheets, Lane County.
Pat Farr, Board of County Commissioners.
Sid Lykin, Lane County Board.
Emma Newman, Springfield, sitting in for Gina Grimaldi.
Christine Lundberg, City of Springfield. Let's start on the first row.
Sure. Yes.
I'm Tom Fuller from ODOT.
Okay.
I'm Kelly Clark with Elcog.
Paul Toast at Elcog.
Steve Gobernich, Elcog.
Tom Herner, Elcog.
Ron Herfeld, City of Eugene.
Sarah Mazie, Forte, State Programs.
David Easter,
Great. Well, welcome to everyone. So with that in the order, I'll call the meeting to order. Ask for approval of the minutes from August.
So moved.
Second.
Okay. Moved and seconded. All of those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, motion carries. Next item is adjustments to the agenda. Are there any announcements or adjustments from the members? Okay, seeing none. The next is comments from the audience. I don't have any cards, so there are no. There's no comments. So moving right along, we are up to 6A, and that is ODOT Drive Healthy Presentation. And I understand we have the name wrong on the agenda, so I'm going to ask for Ellen. Yeah.
Tom Fuller.
Tom Fuller, not Todd.
Yeah.
By the way, there'll be a bright light on.
Sid, you're in the spotlight.
I want to make sure you're awake.
Oh, I am now.
So we're really excited to have Tom here. I also wanted to give you guys a brief update on kind of what the Safe Lane Coalition is doing around distracted driving. I know there's been interest from this board in the past. Steve's been working really diligently to put together this informational flyer, working with regional staff to review. We now have a website and we have a page dedicated to distracted driving with all sorts of resources, including links to the ODOT Drive Healthy program, so that people can have information about how to self-manage cell phone use while they're in the car. So we've got a lot of additional tools besides Drive Healthy on the website, and you all should have one of these flyers. That is what we're going to be doing as our primary outreach around the new law. And I'll turn it over to you.
All right, thank you, Ellen. Again, my name is Tom Fuller. I'm the Communications Manager for the Oregon Department of Transportation. Thank you for asking me to come this morning. We are actually very excited about what's going on to address what is a very serious problem in the state of Oregon. Hopefully this will go. It will, yay. So the first question that most people ask is, why should I care about this topic of distracted driving? The reason that ODOT became so focused on this was in 2016, actually in 2015, we noticed a dramatic increase in the number of roadway fatalities and serious injury crashes. And my communications team, which is folks located all around the state and also in Salem, began to look into asking the question of why, what's contributed to this. And we always look at the 4 E's of engineering and emergency response and those types of things. But what we found when we looked into the problem was the common denominator was what we call lane departure. It basically means you're driving down the road, you don't stay in your lane. You drive into the other lane, you crash into somebody, you drive off the road, you crash into a pole or a tree or into the ditch or whatever. And we asked our folks in traffic safety if they could give us any insight into why we're seeing a drastic increase in the number of lane departure crashes. And although we don't have data that actually points one-to-one on this, there's a lot of anecdotal evidence that points to the fact that it's distractions. Drivers are becoming distracted for whatever reason, and that's why they're not staying in their lane. Well, then in 2016, we saw again a dramatic increase in the number of roadway fatalities. Nearly 500 people lost their lives on Oregon roadways. That number right there should be astounding and very troubling. It basically erased a decade's worth of progress in safety on Oregon roadways. And that got our attention even more. We had to do something. And so what happened was we commissioned a study done by Southern Oregon University to look into attitudes regarding distracted driving and behavior about distracted driving in the state of Oregon. And the results of that were actually intriguing and very troubling. And we put it together with some other information that we have. And basically that little red car on the infographic on the screen kind of tells the story of that survey, where 57% of Oregonians say that they never drive distracted when they have passengers in the car. But those same group of people, 75%, admitted that when they're alone, they're driving distracted. And what does that mean? It means that they're looking at their mobile electronic device, they're texting, they are looking at videos, they are on social media, they are looking at email. And that really told a troubling story. So then we went out and we looked for other statistics that are available to us. Every 3 hours, a distracted driving crash occurs. 8 people are hurt or killed every day in a distracted driving crash in the country. And in Oregon, a cell phone related crash occurs about every 2 days. And in Oregon, on average, every 2.5 hours, someone dies in a distracted driving crash somewhere in the United States, every 2.5 hours. So what happened is our director, Matt Garrett, after some discussions, pulled together a task force representing people from all sorts of disciplines, all sorts of areas around the state. The task force met multiple times during the year of 2016, and we pulled from law enforcement. We had judges, we had lawmakers, behavioral psychologists, AAA, educators, numerous different representations of areas that are touched by distracted driving. The task force broke up into 4 subject areas, looking at the data, what's available about distracted driving, and what do we need in order to intelligently attack this issue. The idea of enforcement, how can we produce better enforcement practices? Education, how can we shift cultural norms about distracted driving? And then policy, what are some things that we can do in terms of legislation to both improve education and also the enforcement of distracted driving? So the task force met 4 times during the year, broke up into subgroups, and came up with 2 major recommendations. And that was around better enforcement and more effective education. Basically, the enforcement and the policy groups kind of melded together, and the data group basically came back and said, yeah, the data stinks. There's got to be a way to get better data on distracted driving, but you can appreciate the problem. If someone is involved in a crash, unless it's involving a serious injury or a death, it's unlikely that the court will subpoena the cell phone and then have the ability to look into that phone to see if the person was actually looking at their phone or engaged with their phone at the time. So it's really hard for us unless there's a self-reporting or unless the officer actually or a witness actually sees the person. So it's really hard for us to get good data around it, but we're definitely working on that. But better enforcement and more effective education were definitely 2 very important areas. First, better enforcement. The group working with Representative Andy Olson, Senate President Peter Courtney, came up with recommendations and sort of vetted legislation that was then introduced into the 2017 session of the Oregon legislature. And what came out of that was House Bill 2597, which just became effective on October 1st. The law helps us because a little while ago there was an appeals court decision that basically neutered the effectiveness of the current cell phone law. So law enforcement around the state were nearly unable to make citations or effectively use the current laws. So this closed loopholes, it removed exemptions, dramatically increases the fines, and provides for, it's not really a diversion, but there's a way for first-time offenders to learn, I think it's called an avoidance, distracted driving avoidance course that they can take so that they don't have to pay these fines. It also makes it easier for law enforcement to cite for distracted driving. And kind of on a little side note, the new law also allows us at the Department of Transportation to qualify for funds from the National Highway Transportation Safety Administration to greatly enhance our education and outreach efforts around distracted driving. So we're really excited about that. So law enforcement are currently now have better tools to be able to cite, but just because you pass a better law, raise the fines, I can see heads nodding already, it doesn't mean that people are going to automatically adhere to the law. In fact, what the Southern Oregon University study found for us, this is how they titled their study actually, that distracted driving has become an epidemic in the state of Oregon. We are literally addicted to our mobile electronic devices, our cell phones or whatever. We can't help but look at them, and it doesn't stop when we get behind the wheel. I share a story of someone that I know was talking about this problem of distracted driving, and she said, you know, I just had this happen to me today. I joined a Facebook group with some folks that I was very connected to, and I was concerned about how some of those members were doing in that Facebook group. And I got behind the wheel of my car, started driving to where I was going, and before I knew what I was doing, I realized I was looking at my phone and checking in on Facebook because I was concerned about these people. We do this behavior without even realizing what we're doing because it is an addiction. And a lot of this stuff is, we go into great detail on our drivehealthy.org website. There's a Learn page where we connect to a lot of the resources and the research that's been done around distracted driving. But the task force, the second recommendation was really around more effective education. We've all heard distracted driving messages out there. There's AT&T It Can Wait campaign and just a plethora of clever messages in the marketplace. Many of them are saying, you know, oh, you bad people, don't text and drive. They simply haven't been very effective at reducing distracted driving behavior. It's going the opposite direction in a big hurry. And so the task force really wanted us to come up with something that was not just another clever message, but something that could actually become more effective in reducing behavior. And so that's where we came up with this idea of Drive Healthy. We wanted to take a positive approach to reducing the incidence of distracted driving in the state of Oregon, rather than just shaming and blaming. And the idea of Drive Healthy is we try to have a healthy lifestyle. We try to eat right best we can. We try to exercise. We try to have a healthy environment and take care of our areas around us. So why not be healthy when we're behind the wheel as well? And what we mean by Drive Healthy is to have your hands on the wheel and your mind on the road. Because AT&T did some really great research, and they found that the real problem with distracted driving isn't your eyes. That's a big thing. You look down at your phone, you've traveled the length of a football field blindfolded. That's a pretty scary thing to think about. But the real problem is cognitive distraction. If you're thinking about that text or that social media post that you're looking at, you're not thinking about the road. You're not paying attention to your surroundings. Talked to a guy yesterday on the phone. He said, you know, the real problem here is awareness and focus. And he was absolutely right. When we look at our phones and we think about what's on the phones, we're not thinking about the fact that there's a car stopping very quickly in front of us. We're not thinking about the fact that we've now gone, one wheel has gone off the side of the pavement. And that makes us much more vulnerable to a crash. So we designed Drive Healthy then after a model that we saw in the city of Boston. Last year at this time, they launched Boston's Safest Driver. And that campaign basically encouraged people to put an app on their phone that could tell whether they had unlocked the phone while they were driving. And if they didn't unlock their phone, they had a higher score. And in Boston, you competed as neighborhoods. So you put in the zip code of where you live, and then it associated with you with a neighborhood. And they were trying to find Boston's safest driver. Their app does a lot more than just distracted driving. It's actually a transportation information tool. They measured things such as routes that people were taking and other parts of driving, such as acceleration, cornering, and braking. But it was interesting what it involved our campaign is that in the first month that they launched Boston's Safest Driver, among those who joined the campaign, they saw the actual behavior based on the data from the phone. The incidence of distracted driving fell by nearly 50%. Pretty dramatic, pretty positive. I put the app on my phone, and our fellow that was helping us do this kind of research told me what neighborhood to join, because it's the one where she lived in Boston. And from my own personal experience, it completely changed my interaction with the telephone when I got behind the wheel, because I didn't want my score to go down. This is the idea of gamification and immediate feedback. These two types of things actually are found scientifically to change behavior. If you've been driving down the road, you've seen these signs everywhere, right? You are driving blink, blink, blink speed. And if you're going over the speed limit, it's telling you that. And it keeps telling you you're going over the speed limit until you slow down until you're going the speed limit, and then it's a solid indicator of your speed. They've done a lot of studies around these signs. They're highly effective. It's immediate feedback. With an app like the Boston Safest Driver, when you get to your destination, you get immediate feedback on how you did. And I remember I stopped at Starbucks at Kaiser Station, and apparently I was looking at my phone while I was in Starbucks, and then I just walked out, set it down or actually put it in my suit coat pocket and drove off. But I hadn't locked the screen of the phone. So the phone thought I was still potentially using it. So when I sped up on the freeway, I got a violation, a screen lock violation or something like that. And I just, wow, can't believe it. I talked to Matt Garrett the other day, and our director, and he said that he's just religious about looking at his phone every time he comes to his destination, because he wants to see how his score was. And he gets all mad if he gets some kind of a violation that he doesn't deserve. So this idea of immediate feedback, we combined that with gamification. Now, in Boston, you actually compete to win prizes, like $1,000 for Boston's Safest Driver. We're working on incentives. We can't really do that as a state organization, but we have private sector partners that we're encouraging to help us out. In September, the folks that wrote our app, Lifesaver, they donated some Amazon gift cards to the highest scoring drivers. This month, AAA is throwing in AAA memberships. And what we're encouraging folks to do, I'll get to this here in just a minute, but is to come up with their own incentives, perhaps for their own area. Maybe it's Lane County's safest driver can get, free something at some store, or football tickets. There you go. Now we're talking. Man, I'm going to move to Eugene. So we designed this campaign around this idea of immediate feedback and gamification, but we added one more element, and that's the competition element, not from a neighborhood perspective, but from a team perspective. And here's why. AT&T's It Can Wait research found that to actually change distracted driving behavior, it takes three things. You get with your 5 closest friends, colleagues, co-workers, family members. You admit to driving distracted, pledge that you're not going to do it anymore, and then hold one another accountable. And so what we wanted to do was to encourage people to form up small teams and then find a way to compete as a team, holding each other accountable with other teams maybe of a like nature. Maybe it's the night shift versus the day shift. It's the first floor versus the second floor. It's U of O versus OSU, maybe, you know, something like that. One fraternity versus another. But that idea of competition, and then we have the drivehealthy.org website where we have the leaderboard, and you can actually see either on your phone or on the site how your team is doing in comparison with others. So we just began the campaign in September, and one of the things that I thought was interesting that Matt Garrett said was that technology got us into this problem, and technology should help us to get out of it. And so that's what we've done is we contracted with Lifesaver out of California, and they adopted their current app, which is free, to include the Drive Healthy competition. So when you download the app, you put it on your phone, you can immediately join a team right there from the app, or you can go to the website if there's not a team of the type that you want, and you can suggest a new team. And then so it's really simple. You just form that team, you install the app, and then you drive. And the phone with its accelerometer knows when you're driving rather than walking fast. And if you try and unlock it, it says, oh, keep your eyes on the road. But if you still go ahead with it and you don't hit the passenger unlock button, then your score goes down and your team's going to get hurt. So you want to keep your score up so that your team can feel good about itself and can actually win. So that's the heart of the campaign. We're running it for a year. It's a pilot, but we're hoping it starts a movement where we continue to see this idea to gain traction around the state. Now, how can you guys help? And actually very excited that you've asked me to come here, and the discussions that we've had, you guys are kind of the first of the counties in Oregon to really want to get organized around this, and so kudos to you. I think that it's wonderful. One thing, just going back to your different organizations, encourage the formation of teams yourself, and also then help us to publicize the campaign on your websites, newsletters, your contacts. Help us to spread the word about this. We think it's a fun way for folks to get involved in something that will actually help to change their behavior. As I experienced, it changed mine. And then here's a new thing that we've been looking at that I'm hoping that all of you will help us to do, and that is in the realm of challenges. You know, when a university is maybe in the national finals in a particular sport, and they challenge the head of the university and of the opposing team, whoever wins, you know, they have to send them a six-pack of the local brew or something like that. What we want to do is to take that and bring it into Drive Healthy. So perhaps, Madam Mayor, you would challenge the mayor of Eugene with your team to see who is the safest driver between the mayor's team of Springfield and the mayor's team or the city council of Eugene. These types of challenges then you can publicize yourself. It becomes bragging rights. You know, hey, you know, this month we got a score of, you know, 98. Look at how great we are. And so I think, again, this helps to kind of promote excitement around the campaign. And I should mention that the scores start over every month. So if you feel like you didn't do very well, like I looked at my phone this morning, I had a score of 50 in September. I really couldn't figure out where that came from. And then I realized I'd actually turned my phone off because I was on vacation for like 3 or 4 days and didn't really want to see the flood of emails that I normally get. Well, then that's kind of a violation. So we're kind of working through some of the kinks of the campaign. But anyway, so, you know, creating your own teams, publicizing the campaign, and then helping us by challenges. So that kind of concludes my presentation. Happy to answer any questions that you might have.
Okay. Thank you, Tom. Questions?
Comment. Yes. I love this. I want to thank you for it. I think it's great, and Alan and I are going, oh, city council team, city council team. So I think it's an excellent idea, and it gives us a really excellent way to get the community involved. So I appreciate that. It also sort of proves the theory that we can't actually multitask.
Right.
Right. We can't really.
But you can have many serial tasks going at the same time. Right. But yeah, multitasking is a
really can't.
Yeah.
And So, but I think it's a great idea, so thank you.
Great.
Except they only have 6 city councilors. We have 8.
The teams aren't limited.
Oh.
You can have a bunch of people on a team if you want. Yeah.
How does your phone know whether you're a passenger in the car or the driver in the car?
So if you unlock the phone and the car's going, there's a button you can push that says, I'm the passenger.
Oh, okay.
Now that shows up, it doesn't really ding your score, but it does show up as a passenger unlock. So there is a way to do that.
You could trick the whole system if you were.
You could, if you're really shifty, if you really want to try and get around it. But we know you're not like that.
No.
You would never do that,
I never
Patty.
know what my
No.
phone is. I'm not addicted to it. I hate it.
All right. Yes, sir.
Gary?
It would be interesting if the automotive industry somehow had to pay a fee to put an 8 to 10-inch monitor in the front of the car. You see more and more likely that there are screens in the vehicles, either a screen to watch the kids in the back or a screen with some kind of map on it or whatever. And to me, that's always struck me as a very distracted thing. It's basically, I remember when I first started watching music videos on the computer, they were about that size. It was about a 4 to 8 inch screen, and you could sit there mesmerized watching the Gin Blossoms sing a song even if you had a 14-inch laptop, you were watching those 4 to 8 inches because that was the best deal you could get. And to me, it seems like for what little value you would have by putting that monitor in there, the chances of being distracted are much bigger.
Yeah, we really encourage people to only go by their audio prompts. So when I was coming down here, I didn't know exactly where the public library was, so I had Waze going on my phone. But I wasn't watching it, I was just listening, because it'll prompt you. That's a much safer way to go, yeah.
Yes.
Thanks. Every year I go to Willamette High School and they have a legislative day where the kids they form teams, and the teams propose a legislative agenda. And 5 years ago, kids from Willamette, this one group wanted to do exactly what you're talking about, an app that tells you when, that locks you out of driving and using your phone. Not exactly what you're talking about, but I'm enthused about this because I have this Fitbit Blaze, and it's a game. It's a steps game, and now I don't mind getting up and walking over a glass of water because it adds to my steps every time I go.
Oh yeah, gamification is very powerful.
It really is powerful, and I'm intrigued by it. But my question is that the bill in some ways doesn't seem clear. The law doesn't seem clear. The one button, for instance, you're allowed to push a button one time. And I think people need more clarification on that, myself included. For instance, if I'm driving and my phone rings and I just push a button and I've got my earphones on, is that okay?
Yeah, it is. It's that single touch or swipe to enable a function. I exchanged an email with a guy yesterday who was saying, I need to touch the phone and for traffic, announcements, and then swipe once and then scroll down to where I am. How is that? I said, that's a violation. You shouldn't be doing that because all that time you're looking at your phone. So the idea would be momentary single touch or swipe. Yeah. But and this was done, and I wasn't part of the legislative discussions when the bill was actually in committee. But from talking to our government relations folks, they say that was very intentional, but it will be somewhat up to the officer's discretion. So we'll find, I think, the law maybe being tested in courts to get better definitions around that.
Good, and I'm looking forward to that because this is great because it really is truly a problem, and I witness it myself. Because I get in my car and the same thing. My Facebook group or whatever. I don't have a Facebook group, but
right.
just.
But if you did, it would be telling you.
It certainly would. You want to keep track of that, but I think the more we can remind people of it, most people don't want to break the law.
Right.
It's like the flashing speed signs. Most people don't want to speed through school zones. Mm-hmm. And if you remind them, then they won't do it. So I'm intrigued by it. I wish we could do the same for smoking. Now, I believe that lighting a cigarette is distracted driving, but that's a different discussion, a different situation, a different place. So bravo, and the more we can do to help, I'm right on board.
Excellent.
Yes, Ellen.
Yeah, this is great. I think it's awesome. So I miss, is the app ready to go?
Oh yeah, it's out there.
How do you get to it?
So if you go to your app store, whatever that is, if you're Apple or Android, and I think you can actually search for Drive Healthy, but definitely Lifesaver is the name of the app. And if you have an Oregon zip code, when you download the Lifesaver app and then activate it, it will automatically ask you if you want to join the Drive Healthy campaign. So they were able to figure that out, the technologists down there with Lifesaver. And it's a couple of guys actually that started the company, and they were concerned about their kids driving distracted. So they've got a lot of passion around it as well.
The other question I had is, does any of this analysis look at, or the studies like the AT&T study, does it look at drive-through food? I was driving by this guy the other day, and he was eating a hamburger in his hand and driving with this hand, and when he put it up to his face, the entire face was covered by the wrapper, and he couldn't see anything. And I thought, that's just as bad as looking at your screen.
It really is. Those types of distractions have been around for a while. When I started as a television reporter in Medford back in the 1980s, one of the first stories I had to do was a young man who came from getting his driver's license in Wairika, California, stopped at McDonald's to get a hamburger. He was driving and he was eating it, crossed the center line, got in a crash and died.
Oh, jeez.
Yes, those are also bad behaviors for driving safely. But the use of the mobile electronic devices just exploded. So, we had to start somewhere, but we hope that, this will be a doorway to then talk about things like putting on makeup, reading the newspaper, Even talking on the phone is a cognitive distraction. And part of what we're doing at ODOT is we have created a do not disturb policy, which basically says when you're in the car and you're commuting or on state business, we don't want you talking on the phone. We're not going to contact you, and we don't expect you to contact us. We're in the middle of implementing that right now. One of the things that just came out last week, which is kind of exciting for Apple iPhone users, iOS 11, comes with a feature called Do Not Disturb, and it invites you to enable it. And basically it means when you get in the car and you're driving, you won't even get a call or a text. There's like an auto reply you can send that says, hey, when I get to my destination, I'll get this text. And that actually happened to me. I was coming back from San Francisco, was in the middle of a conversation with my daughter-in-law over text as we're walking to the car, got in the car and drove home, got home, and I opened up the phone, and here was my auto reply that said, you sent me a text, but I didn't get it because I'm driving, and then I could continue the conversation. So,
do we have that in the legislature now? I sent a text to James Manning this morning, and I got auto reply, I'm driving right now, I'll get back to you later.
He must have iOS 11 on his phone.
Right on.
Isn't that great? Yeah. So we're going to require it on all ODOT cell phones. It's going to be mandatory that it's turned on, just to help.
Yeah.
We've talked about it.
So this, I'm a complete proponent of figuring out ways to keep people's eyes on the road and paying attention, which is an age-old problem. It's human behavior, so you're only going to impact it so much because there's a myriad of ways people can get around it or don't care or whatever. But there's a couple of situations, like many of the newer cars, you're going to be able to talk via your console is a whole distraction device in and of itself, that you can talk, you've got video, you've got whatever, all kinds of things are all going on, and you're busy looking at that, or at least I've been the passenger going, there is so much to distract somebody while they're driving. So those are still issues to me. Two is trying to figure out a place to pull over when you're on the freeway. So I'm just saying, except for those remote, I know, I'm looking at Brandy, I'm looking at both of you over there, ODOT, is that if, it would be great, it's not that you have to have an entire rest area, but if you had some spots you could pull out, because you go on these, at least I do, these 2-3 hour drives that you need to pull over and say, oh, by the way, I'm lost and I'm going to be late, or something like that. You want to tell somebody, and so, but you don't have any place to pull over, basically. So just an extra little slip that you can get off the road safely would be helpful.
You'll get right on that.
Yes, I figured that. It's just a little extra asphalt. Anyway.
No, it's not. No, it's not when you're 65-mile-an-hour traffic.
I know, that's what I mean, is I see that, but the other bigger issue, having been the manager that dealt with service technicians, is you have people out on the road all day long, and they are on their phone when they are not physically at somebody's house, and you have to be able to get in touch with them. And the old rules said, hey, because you have this kind of a job, you can use your phone because it's integral to actually getting your job done and doing it in a time frame that actually still makes you money at the end of the day. So I anticipate what the heck are all of these people doing when they're used to being able to have access to being able to get in touch with each other during the day while they're, you need to get in touch with them. They're going to miss that other person that they were supposed to stop and pick up the parts that, you sent out there, whatever. So what are you doing that are in those other venues, which included police and fire and life safety and service providers that depended on being able to use phones?
So to your first point, which was around changing human behavior, we did see a change in behavior around seatbelts. We don't even think about it now, but nobody wore seatbelts decades ago. And it took decades. It was a different world then, different ways of communicating. But now Oregon is almost always at the very top in terms of compliance with the seatbelt laws. And we have kids that want to let their parents drive out of the driveway unless they put their seatbelts on. Now we want the kids to say, get off your phone. What are you doing on your phone? To help us. So I think it is possible to actually change behavior. The overall goal of what we're trying to do is to delegitimize distracted driving. But it's taking us time to do that. But we hope it'll be much faster than seatbelt use or impaired driving to really change those societal norms. And then to your last point, there are exemptions in the law for emergency personnel, but not for people that are doing their job. I'll give you a personal story. I was driving home the other day on River Road in Marion County, and there is a deep ditch on both the west and the east sides of that road. There's nowhere to go. And I'm driving down, and coming down the other way is a truck. I mean, oftentimes those big semis, that's how they communicate. And the guy was halfway in my lane. I could see he was looking down at his phone. There was nowhere for me to go. I would not be here with you this morning had that guy not suddenly looked up and corrected his lane of travel. So yeah, I get it that it is a definite inconvenience, but taking my life would be a much bigger inconvenience. So I think that the trade-offs, if you're using a radio or if you're an emergency person responding to an incident, you can use your phone, but you get training to be able to use it effectively. But it is going to require people to change their behavior. That person that's needing to know whether the parts had arrived for them, they'll need to check before they start out, not actually while they're driving. So yeah, it is going to be a bit of inconvenience. I think it's very much worth it, speaking from personal experience.
I would just say, let's just push driverless cars or something that's going to settle all of that.
We are working on that too.
Because you're
not the cars, but the how do we integrate them into the transportation system.
Hillary?
Yeah, I was just going to say that too. Two things can happen. One is that we have driverless cars, and the other is we have to, ODOT in their safety planning needs to have phone parks. It's not what the mayor suggested. Is if you have long stretches between rest stops, perhaps we need a phone park, and that's just pullovers where people can make their contacts safely, and that becomes part of a safety plan.
We'll get AT&T and Verizon and T-Mobile to sponsor them, pay for them.
Well,
yeah, I don't care if their names are on it.
If we're saving lives, how different is it? I mean, this is not foolish. This is, if we're saving lives, it needs to go into safety plans. If people need to or are going to use their phones regardless, then they need a safe place to pull over. And it's a new way of thinking. We don't think like that. Right. And yet, here we have this huge increase in deaths because people are on their phones. And I know there's a big difference between perhaps someone keeping up with their Facebook and someone who is trying to contact their home office with serious issues. But regardless, if somebody's going to do the action, do the function, and die, then we need to start thinking about some alternatives to support the proper behavior. So.
Okay. Well, we've gone over time, but we appreciate very much, and we know there'll be more. We'll figure this. It isn't as simple like seat belts, but it's we'll get there. I'm sure. Okay, thank you. Okay, so our next item on the agenda is House Bill 2016, and Paul, you're here to walk us through what happened and where we are.
Good afternoon. Yes, this is just another in my continuing set of updates on how the implementation of 2017 is going and what else may be happening. I'll talk about a couple of small things that aren't even 2017 related. In your packet, I put a couple of attachments, 4 attachments. I just want to summarize those real quick. The first one is an updated list and timing of the implementation of the earmarked projects in HB 2017. I had given you another list back in August that didn't include all the projects. This one does. I think the first list I gave you only went through 2021. This one goes through all of the projects through 2025. So for instance, you'll see that 42nd Street in Springfield is now scheduled in 2023, etc. No, look at Franny again. Don't look at me.
Yeah.
No, sorry. The timing of these was mainly done on a cash flow basis, and in other words, what ODOT could afford to do per year, and also to some extent with regards to priorities. The second attachment in here is an update on the formation of the Safe Routes to Schools Implementation Rulemaking Advisory Committee. This memo that's in here went to the Oregon Transportation Commission at their meeting in September, and the Oregon Transportation Commission did approve the formation of the Rulemaking Advisory Committee with the structure that you see on page 2 of the memo, the representation there as it's generally laid out. I do know that staff has talked about this and has been looking at a couple of options for making sure that we have representation from this geographic area on that committee, if at all possible. I haven't heard in the past couple of weeks whether there's been any updates on that. I'm looking at Emma. I don't know if you've heard anything. Okay. But we are working to possibly have somebody from this area serve on that committee. The other thing I will say about Safe Routes to Schools implementation, I've said this before, but it was formally part of the presentation to the OTC a couple of weeks ago, where currently ODOT is proposing that 50% of the funds available, and recall that what the bill did was implement a $10 million per year fund for Safe Routes to Schools infrastructure projects within 1 mile of schools with a match requirement and some other caveats, and it will increase to $15 million per year. But what ODOT is currently proposing is that 50% of that money would be available through a competitive grant program for jurisdictions to apply for, and the other 50% ODOT would use at their discretion for priority projects. There has been some pushback on that in terms of why not just put the money towards the most important projects, let it all be a competitive grant project or a process. There's a little concern about where ODOT would use the 50% of the money. And again, I'm hearing that from a number of sources, including, again, our local staff. So I think there's going to be some pushback on that, but that is really what this, one of the things that this committee would discuss. The third attachment in your packet is what I wanted to show you, but then I'll explain that there's not a lot in here. I'm sorry, the third one was the Safe Routes to School. The fourth one, I'll go back to number 2. The fourth one is the potential corrections to House Bill 2017. There's 4 pages of corrections. I think I mentioned that as the bill was being finalized in the first couple of days of July, that there were a lot of things that made certain legislators and even ODOT uncomfortable, and they were keeping a parking lot list of those potential things to come back in February of 18 and address. This is that list. I will tell you that I've gone through this, and I don't believe there's anything in here that we as an MPO should be significantly concerned about. A lot of them are housekeeping A lot of them are making sure that things align across various laws. HB 2017 may have done some things that had other consequences or impacted or interacted with other sections of Oregon statute, and so they're trying to clean that up. So I'd be happy to answer questions if you had a chance to look at this or try and find answers, but I didn't see anything in here that I think we need to pay attention to. That said, since they're going to sort of reopen the discussion about corrections to HB 2017, we're certainly going to keep an eye when the legislature starts up, and the now permanent Joint Committee on Transportation. Remember, that was part of HB 2017, is that it formed a permanent committee, Joint House-Senate Committee on Transportation. Now that they're opening it up again, we will certainly keep a close eye to see what else might change. Among those things that we would want to be very aware of is additional money being earmarked for projects. There's funding that could come from future increases in the gas tax. The next one is only a couple of years out, and by the time we start in February of 18, the next 2-cent increase will be in 2020. They haven't determined where that money will go, so there could certainly be positioning for that money starting as early as this next legislative session. I skipped over, and I did not mean to, the second attachment in the packet, which is sort of hidden in there. At least I hope it made it in. Did I just... Okay, let me see. Safe routes to schools. You know what? I don't think it's in my packet, and maybe that's part of the problem. It's supposed to be the Connect Oregon temporary rule attachment, and oh, it is there. It's on the back of the table. It's on the back of the blue and white line table. We usually separate those by a page, and I'm sorry, but it's there. It's just a real quick one-pager, and I wanted to call this out for 2 reasons in particular. One, Connect Oregon has traditionally been a competitive grant program. It's not going to be a competitive grant program this time around, this biennium, because the bill earmarked all of the money that was directed into the Connect Oregon Fund for this biennium and potentially for next biennium also. So we may not have a competitive process to discuss here for another 4 years or so. The second reason I wanted to point this out is that the temporary rulemaking that they did was essentially to address that and to address the fact that they need to figure out what some of those earmarked projects are specifically. If you look in the middle of that page, the OTC is directed by HB 2017 to direct Connect Oregon funds to 4 projects, and it says specific projects, but one of them is not so specific. It's that Mid-Willamette Valley Intermodal Facility that we've talked about before. And frankly, the other 3 also have project proposals and definition that have to be put around them. But that first one, the Mid-Willamette Valley Intermodal Facility, is the one that we in particular are interested in. There's been discussions about, is it going to be Lane County? Is it going to be Lynn County? I think that there's been some progress towards one direction or the other, but one of the things that this does is it sets up a process where applicants can apply for funding to develop a project proposal. In other words, and I only put the very brief version of this in here, but in other words, what this set up is a way for people to put project proposals forward and receive funding from the OTC, a little over $1 million, to develop a full project proposal by, I believe, 2020 or 2021.
Right, I have a little time on that, but the first round of the apps are due in December.
They're due in December, right. So a very short time frame by December to put an application in to receive over $1 million to then develop a full application for, in this case, the $25 million for the intermodal facility in the Willamette Valley. So with that, I'm going to actually turn it over to Commissioner Lycan, who has some information and is going to update us on where the discussions around that are.
So on Friday of last week, myself and Alex Kyler met in Albany. And we met with the folks that are working on Lynn County, including the project manager. And what was interesting as we viewed the site, something I even wasn't aware of with Lynn County, and this is a pretty significant advantage that they have. Right there on that site is the UP line and the BNSF line. They're right in the middle. So they have both class 1s, boom, right there. And they're kind of smart on this. They're playing the class 1s against each other a little bit, which I think is the right thing to do. Because again, to quote Tony Hyde, there's God, the railroads, and the federal government. So that's kind of how the hierarchy. Railroads think that they're in charge, and in a sense they are. With the meeting, it was pretty apparent. So meeting with Commissioner Nyquist, as we were walking in, you could tell he's a little nervous because he's hoping there's not going to be competition. And so knowing Roger, I've known Roger for years, and sat down and said, well then, let's make a deal. And so the conversation, because we told him, I said, you know, I got to tell you, Business Oregon's pretty excited about a transload facility in Goshen on the Corp line. And they are. They actually expressed really positive feedback on that. And the challenge with that is that there's a pinch point in Glenwood with UP and Corp. And I got to tell you, it's just not, it doesn't work very well. And UP is in control, and they don't want to build a spur, and it's really tough there. So what we did, having that conversation with them, we said, okay, well, what about, and this is the important thing. So for folks who are not sure about United Front, I'm going to tell you right now how United Front pays off. Lynn County does not have a DC, they do not have DC back as far as interest is concerned, like we do. It's huge. So we brought to the table, and again, I want to make sure that we were moving this thing along. So Roger and the project manager said, well, what if we were to take a look at a Lynn Lane application? And I said, okay, let's talk about connectivity. That's the key point, connectivity. And I think the OTC would like this, the connectivity piece. And that was, what if we're to create a Lynn Lane with the connectivity going all the way down to the Port Ocouse Bay line? And the project manager, who's extremely experienced in this, said, you know what, we could do this. And I said, the other thing we bring to the table is this, that you guys don't have. We could have our lobbyists begin working on an infra grant that's due in November of next year. And instead of $25 million, you bring $75 million to the table. And again, they don't have the DC piece that we do. They don't have Marion Brett. And so it's really sparked their interest to the point where, after meeting with them for over an hour, I think that we in a sense had a handshake agreement. Now, we're going to wait for it in writing, because that was the thing. I said, you know, what will make this work is when we see it in writing. If we see an actual Lynn Lane application in writing with the connectivity all the way down to the Port Ocouse Bay line, we may have a deal here. Other than that, if we don't see it in writing, then you know what, we may have a case for a parallel with you at Goshen Corp. And so we left at least with a handshake agreement. And I actually felt like that may be the really great opportunity, is if both Lynn and Lane were to partner on this. And the key for us would be include the Port Ocouse Bay rail line. And so that's where it is right now. But I got to tell you, I was really impressed. They have options on the property, by the way. And that's something we don't have. So they have options on the property. I don't remember the acreage. It's about 200 acres. It's very large. And they're both talking transload and reload. So it's a really pretty impressive scope when I saw this. And again, they have both class 1s right there. And I did not know that until you get to see overhead. You get to see them right there and you go, we don't have that. That's pretty impressive. So that's where we are right now. I still think that we need to keep our powder dry, and which Alex agreed, and that is to make sure that we keep the powder dry to include, at least have a conversation about Corp and Goshen. Because as I said, the folks at Business Oregon actually like that site very well. They really like it. And the other piece that they talked to us about is that there's an potential interchange project right there, yes, that really leads right into that facility that could really change dramatically on the trucks moving in to unload on the rail. So they've got a lot of positives, there's no doubt about it, and they have a lot of challenges. but they're so far along compared to where we are. So that's the update.
Yes, thank you, Sid.
Yeah.
So, yes, thank you. That covered everything that David Reeser had sent out to staff about that where it stands at this point. There's a couple of other things I wanted to talk about real quick about HB.
Patty had a question.
I'm sorry, yes.
I haven't been here years, so I'm still going to say I'm new. But I wonder, Sid, could you just tell me how that partnership, which I believe in always is a good thing, how that benefits Lane County? I'm missing a link there.
Okay, so what the benefits is I'm gonna call it the disaster. The disaster at Terminal 6 at the Port of Portland. And what this has done is that what's happened, because the Port of Portland, what happens is our ag products traditionally were unloaded at the Port of Portland, put on ship, sent out. They've been in a log jam for, I don't know how many years now. I think it's on at least 3, or even maybe even longer than that. I'm not sure. What's happening is we have major ag companies here, and what they're doing is they're trucking all that product to Port of Tacoma and some to the Port of Oakland. And part of it, the reason why, is because it's too expensive to negotiate with Class 1. And the Class 1s are lead from here right straight up. And so it's too expensive. So if you have a facility there, it allows our ag products from Lane, Bland, you name it, the surrounding areas, to, in a sense, truck, unload, put it on rail, and ship it, either send it up to the ports, either to Tacoma or Oakland. It's going to be so much more, it's much easier than dealing with truck, because again, you have those major points of contention on I-5 in Portland, and it used to be they didn't have to go across the bridge. It used to be they just cut off over to the Port of Portland, unloaded, and then they're done. So you're going from 3 loads a day in Lynn County to 1 load a day going to the Port of Tacoma. That's the reason why. That's the benefits that you'd receive here in Lane County.
And then you mentioned the Port of Coos Bay, so I was trying to.
Okay, so the Port of Coos Bay has been on the radar, and Madam Chair, I'm going to leave that to you. How far do you want me to go on? I'm not going to go too in depth in this. We can talk later if you'd like.
Yeah, and what I was really going to say, for those of us that, are visual, I'm thinking, if we could have a little chart, has a little truck, has a little train, this is what happens, a ship comes in, does this, does that, because some of us actually are far enough removed from how our commerce works via rail, boats, trucks, and how's it working now? What does this facility do that is a benefit? And then questions like, okay, why is the Port of Coos Bay important? Why would this partnership be important? It doesn't have to be long. Maybe something for those of us that don't like more than 1 page but does that make sense?
Yes, I can.
Because
I think
Sid knows it, inside and out, but for the rest of us, this is an important, I had it all starred, that's an important project.
Yeah, I would agree.
And so it would be helpful to understand that a little bit better so we know what we're supporting and where all those connections.
So Patty, you and I can talk later and we can go over that, but
but for the benefit of the rest of us, it would be helpful.
Yeah, I agree, and I think the visual is real important.
Yeah.
The other thing that Lynn County has done is they've gone out and talked to their shippers, the agricultural people that are shipping this product. And they have been told by those customers that it would save them a lot of money, and it would make their product more competitive on the world market, all the way in to overseas as well. They also talked about it would provide a connection to the Portland area and the Port of Portland, but also to the east-west route on 84. There's another rail line that goes and takes the product out to the east, and that is a huge advantage. So you could see that we may be able to have a lot more, products going a lot more places cheaper than we do now currently. So that's pretty exciting for economic opportunities.
Yes, and all of us are focused on economic opportunities, and to understand exactly how that commerce works would be very helpful for us.
There's a book called God is an Englishman, that talks about that, but it's rail and wagon, not not truck and. Excuse me, canal and wagon, canal and wagon.
Mayor, I'll put something together. There was, back in, I think, March, when the joint committee work groups were still developing the bill, a lobbyist for the rail industry came in from Texas and gave a presentation to the work group on transload, because even the legislators didn't understand everything and how it worked. I think I still have a copy of that. If not, I'll obtain it. I do remember that he indicated their estimates were a transload facility of this order in the Willamette Valley, somewhere in the southern Willamette Valley, would remove a minimum of 1,500 freight truck trips per day on I-5. So that tells you the impact.
Yeah, and that's a lot, and we still do for our climate, greenhouse gas and stuff, we still have taken into account I-5. So, yeah, that would be hugely, lots of benefits. So understanding that would be helpful. Okay, great.
Okay, like I said, a few other quick HB 2017 and legislative things, sorry. One of the other things in HB 2017 was the establishment of the transit funding source, if you will, the 1/10 of 1% employee payroll tax, and generates a little over $100 million a year. They are working on how to distribute that money. Again, one of the things that they're doing there is putting together a advisory committee. I have not heard much about that structure, and I don't know if somebody from LTD or Franny has more on that committee's structure. I do know, again, that the OTC a couple of weeks approved the formation of that committee. And the money in general is going to go, let's see, I had it here, there. 90% of the money, roughly $100 million a year, 90% will be distributed by formula to transit agencies. I believe LTD believes they're going to receive around $7 million a year in additional funding.
That was our estimate, yeah.
That's good.
5% will be distributed through a competitive grant program for providers for special projects. 4% will be another competitive grant program for intercity transit. So again, that might be a source for our Eugene Florence service that we've been looking at for a while now. And then 1% will be fund a technical resource center to help entities, transit providers in other ways. So that is underway.
Can I make a comment?
Yeah.
On that? Right. So we had at the Cascade West Act meeting last week, we had Catherine, what is her last name, from Transit come and do a presentation, Karen Criswell. And she talked about the formula funds and then the competitive grant funds. And they're writing the rules right now about, so it's not, they're setting up the advisory committee for the modal committee, and they're also writing up the rules, so with that committee. One of the things that's interesting and what the Cascade West Act chair talked about was, with this grant program, the competitive grant program, is there a role for the ACTS to play, and by translation, the MPC, about who would get those funds and at least weigh in on those competitive grants so that we would have a better chance that Florence might get selected, Florence to Eugene. So I think that the chairs will probably be talking about this with the OTC next week in the workshop, or 2 weeks from now in the workshop. It's just a kind of a heads up of where we can have some influence, because there's not going to be a lot of opportunities for the ACTS to have influence as all these earmarks are happening. So this might be a way of doing that.
I'd like to add a couple things. I serve on the Public Transportation Advisory Committee to ODOT as the League of Oregon Cities representative. And one thing that we might want to think about as an MPO, I'm not exactly sure what the legislation says, but I think it says the funding is supposed to be for new service to a great extent. I know a priority for MPO has been getting the student transit pass funded, so maybe someone from LTD will be on the Rulemaking Advisory Committee, but try to have some influence over the way the rules are written, that would be allowed as maybe considered new service in some way. Yeah. And then the other thing is I think to some extent the intent of the 5% grant program was that was to replace Connect Oregon for public transportation, because transit will no longer be eligible for Connect Oregon. So that would be a good nexus to the ACTS, because they have a role to play in Connect Oregon prioritization. So.
Thanks.
Yeah, that is exactly what that 5% does. It pulls transit out of Connect Oregon. So a couple other quick ones. Another section of HP 2017 implemented a tolling and value pricing or congestion pricing study. A committee has been formed for that, and it's starting to meet on November 20th. It'll be meeting in the Portland area because it's going to focus really on congestion and value pricing opportunities in that metropolitan area. And most of the representatives are from that geographic area, but I will be tracking that, and it is public and everything. They have a web page set up already, so I'll just be tracking that and maybe giving you some updates on that one. And then, let's see, I think that might be all I want to say about 2017. Let me just, excuse me real quick while I go through my summary. Yeah, that's good for now. The other thing that I wanted to mention, which is not related to 2017, is at the federal level. There's been talk about an infrastructure package for some time now with the new administration. But there hasn't been a lot of movement on it, and there hasn't been a lot of certainty about what that would involve. I was back in DC last week and had a lot of meetings with Congress people and staff and others who know what's going on, and unfortunately the consistent message was we don't know what's going to happen. Now, interestingly, one of the things that happened while I was there was you've heard a lot of the administration talking about how they're going to rely on public-private partnerships and incentivizing private investment in the transportation system. And indeed, the House bill that's been drafted has roughly 50% of the funding relies on public-private partnerships. And yet on Monday when we were there, the administration came out and said, no, we're not going to pursue those any longer. That's not worth the time. We decided it's too much trouble after studying it. And so again, we're sort of back to square one. What does that mean if the White House doesn't want to pursue that? We don't know. Nobody back there could tell us what it meant, except I have the sense from everything I heard that we might just see more of what we've been used to seeing. We might just see more of MAP 21, FAST Act, or Recovery Act type investments or grant programs. In other words, I'm not sure that there's anything new being talked about now, especially that the administration has said private partnerships are off the table, at least as far as they're concerned. I wish I could tell you more. One little anecdote, one of the meetings was with Representative Blumenauer from Oregon, and the first thing he said to us was, please don't give up on the federal government yet, because there just wasn't any progress. And he was talking, again, this whole last week was specifically about infrastructure and transportation and moving forward some planning and policy priorities. So, one other thing I will mention real quick, Brenda and I have been tracking an amendment in the House Transportation Appropriations Bill that might impact MPO funding. What it would do is, and it's a little bit technical and hard to describe, but the federal government gives the transportation funding to the DOT annually, and it gets suballocated to the MPOs and used in other ways. Traditionally, if the recipient has not spent the money, it gets pulled back. And ODOT has always, Oregon has always successfully obligated all of their federal funds and has never had to give any money back. In fact, ODOT has received additional funding because states that don't spend all their money, when it goes back to the feds redistribute it to states that do spend their money. Last time there was a federal redistribution like that, Oregon received an extra $35 million. Exempt from that pullback has been MPO funding. There's an amendment in the House bill that would remove that exemption and subject it to being pulled back if it's not spent. In other words, the money that we provide you for projects. That amendment's not in the Senate version of the bill at this time. There's a lot of lobbying against it being put into law, and I've had a couple of discussions with ODOT staff in the past week that have reassured me that even if it made it into law, it probably would not really affect us because it would only affect us if we weren't spending the money, and ODOT can, as they have in the past, manage the cash flow so that the money does get spent. I can tell you more about it, but like I said, it gets sort of technical after that. We'll keep an eye on it. And that's about all I have legislatively.
Any other, Gary?
Not spending the money, that's downright un-American.
That change, there are a lot of MPOs that don't. I think Brenda's comment when I mentioned to her that I didn't think it would affect Oregon because we could probably manage the cash flow. I think you said, why doesn't every state do that? But states don't. Yeah. That's why ODOT got an extra $35 million. They estimate that if this amendment became law, it would affect about $80 million a year that doesn't get spent in a timely manner, that would get pulled back.
All right. Anything else on this topic? Hey, thank you, Paul.
Mm-hmm.
It's always very helpful to figure out what the heck happened. So now we're going to talk about what's coming up. Yes, the 2021-2024 STIP development.
And this one is,
yeah, and there's no packet materials.
I do have a short PowerPoint. Mostly I have just a global overview for blinded by the lighting.
Better said than us.
Make sure you capture all that.
Yeah, that's interesting, yeah.
Yeah. Oh. Transportation. We don't usually do that.
Hey, good afternoon, everyone. Since we're a little behind schedule, so I'll try to be brief here. And you may remember at the last meeting in August, I provided you with a presentation describing ODOT's approach to and time frame for updating the STIP, Statewide Transportation Improvement Program. This next cycle we're referring to as the 2020-24 STIP. Today, Franny and I would like to provide you with a brief update on where we're at in the process. Before I run through these few slides, I want to give you just a brief verbal overview of where we're at. You may recall the Director's Office is providing us with monthly updates on their discussions with the OTC. They provide us with PowerPoint presentations, and that's what I provided you in August. We're basically trying to help the OTC figure out how to allocate funding to the many programs that are included in the STIP. Have to emphasize this is a complex exercise. It involves some fairly detailed financial and policy analysis. Neither Franny or I are experts on this. Paul probably knows more about it than we do. We're partly the messengers to update you on what's going on, and we're sharing this information with the Lane Act as well. OTC has asked the Act for some feedback at the upcoming OTC Workshop on October 19th. It's been difficult, I think it's fair to say, for all of the acts, not just the Lane Act, to figure out how to provide input to the process. The acts don't really have numbers at this point. We don't have the expertise to analyze some of these things. My understanding is at the upcoming workshop that ODOT staff from the Director's Office will provide a more in-depth discussion with the OTC, and that will help the Lane Act representatives that are there provide the input. Commissioner Lycan will be representing the Lane Act there at that meeting. And the Lane Act, I might mention, is meeting next week to discuss comments. We have some draft comments to share with the OTC. If you're interested and we have time, I could give you a summary of the kinds of comments the Act is considering sharing with the Act. So with that, let me just quickly run through a few slides to provide you a little more context. This might be helpful for you, especially Tom, being new here. Welcome.
Thank you.
These are a compilation of select slides I've pulled from a couple of different slideshows, so they're not really slides at the ODOT Director's Office. These are the questions that the OTC is asking the Lane Acts in particular and other stakeholders to weigh in on. Let me just read them briefly. Among the state highway programs, what is the appropriate split between fix-it Enhance, and Safety. Those are the three main highway programs. And then the second question they're asking for input on is how much funding should be dedicated to non-highway and local programs? So actually two separate things. I'll elaborate on those in a moment. That includes public transportation, bicycle and pedestrian, a local bridge program, the arts safety program, funding for the MPOs, and a few other miscellaneous local programs. These are some conceptual slides that the Director's Office is sharing with the OTC. It's pretty schematic. It just shows a couple of different funding scenarios. It's hard to compare them. And Paul pointed out to me that this is somewhat distorted. It only includes federal funds in this linear pie chart. It doesn't really include contributions from other sources, primarily the House Bill 2017 money. The OTC obviously is considering what to do with that, but this is a simple chart that just shows these two different scenarios. It's hard to compare them, especially because the slide is cut off at the bottom. And without that, it's hard to compare. And it's a difficult slide to make sense of anyway. There's different pie charts, different combinations that the OTC will be considering, how to break out these funds, what proportion to plow into each of these categories. A little bit more detail. Last STIP cycle, you may remember some of this from my previous presentation in August, there was a different approach to programming these funds. There were these three main categories. Enhance, off the top was a big mysterious bucket of money that was programmed through formula funds into various things. For this cycle, in an effort to be more transparent, consistent with what the legislature has asked ODOT to do, we're breaking it out into these 6 programs: Enhance, non-highway, local programs, other functions, Fix-It, and what's the last one? Safety. Thank you. Thanks.
Oh, yeah.
I'm glad you're there, Emma. Local government programs, just a breakdown of what those are. Surface Transportation Program for cities and counties, that's also known as the Fund Exchange Program. We have funding for the MPO planning functions. The local bridge program I mentioned, the CMAQ money that this area is now eligible for. That's all programmed through the STIP or divvied up through the STIP. Transportation and Growth Management, that's a planning grant program that ODOT and DLCD collaborate on. It's been flat for the last several years, but ODOT's proposing to increase funding for that. That's good news for us. In the small jurisdictions here, we fund many of the local transportation system plan updates through transportation growth management money. And then there's this immediate opportunity fund, which is focused on economic development. A little more detail on the local government programs. We talked about some of these, the CMAQ money, the MPO money. There's a small cities pot of money, local bridges, STP for cities and counties. Some of these, and here's a chart that shows how the funding levels are set. I think the purpose of this slide is just to remind everybody that there's discretion in some areas, but in other areas, the federal government or the state legislature dictates some of these proportions. And in some cases, it's an agreement between ODOT and the League of Oregon Cities and help me out with the other one, Sid. Your organization.
AOC?
AOC, of course. Association of Oregon Counties. A little more breakdown into what's required by state and federal legislation and formula. We're required to spend these amounts of money on these big categories: public transportation, state highway fund for bicycle and pedestrian, and this pot of money for discretionary non-highway. Within that pot, the non-highway funding, there are these programs. We talked about some of them. Non-highway leverage. This is an important new pot of money that ODOT's establishing. This would enhance projects in the STIP. We've done this through the STIP before. ODOT comes in with a highway improvement project or even a paving project, and there's an obvious economy in upgrading some of the streetscape. So streetscape improvements and things in conjunction with a highway improvement project, that's what this non-highway leverage money would be for. Off-road bicycle and pedestrian facilities, safe routes to school education program, transportation options, that refers to transportation demand management programs, carpooling, ride sharing, working with employers to encourage those things. Funds for Americans with the Disabilities Act, bus replacements, this is a new program in this STIP. The fleet of buses in the state is aging, and so this would provide a new source of money to help transit providers replace their rolling stock.
Question?
Yes.
That amount, is that an increase or decrease from prior?
This $51 million? Or
is it new altogether?
This is the new amount for this cycle for these non-highway funds. Again, the OTC is considering allocating these funds in a different way than we did before. So this money for the bus replacements, again, is a new dedicated fund. I'm not sure if that fully answers your question. Yes and no. It's new dedicated funds for some of these things, but the general pot of money has always existed. But there's a new amount this cycle.
Okay, thanks.
This is interesting. The OTC, in addition to asking for input from the Lane Acts and others, they did conduct some surveys. Some of you may have actually participated in these surveys. There were 2 different surveys. They asked participants how they thought money should be spent, what's most important. Highest on the list is maintaining the existing roads. That's important, even though congestion is frustrating for everyone. Everybody recognizes that there are potholes and there's pavement that needs to be replaced, and maintaining the existing roads is a big priority. And here are some of the other priorities. I won't walk through all of them, but they're all important. This was another question that was asked. This asked more specifically about reducing traffic congestion. On this question, that was the highest priority. Unfortunately, in my observation, there's not a question that really compares maintaining to relieving congestion. In most people's mind, those are both important, and it would have been nice to ask them. And maybe there was another question, this is a summary, but that's always a challenge. How much to spend on relieving congestion versus maintaining the existing system?
Bill, can you clarify what the colors mean, please?
I'm sorry, the color code?
Yeah. TNIS.
Let me look at another slide that shows that.
I mean, you're just all over the bottom of that screen.
And I'm sorry, it is TNIS. I don't know. There were...
It's probably survey, transportation, something survey.
Transportation needs investment survey.
Yeah, that's it. That's it. We'll make it up.
Yeah, that sounds good.
That works.
That sounds good. Yeah, that's what it is.
And then this slide shows the relationship between the current declining condition of pavement conditions. There are other slides that show other features like culverts, but this focuses on pavement conditions. You can see the trend of the status quo. Current funding trends would lead us down in a declining direction. The green line shows the additional contribution of funds from HB 2017, and that would improve the condition of things. However, it wouldn't fully fund all of our needs. And it's important to remember, for me at least, that there is an established investment strategy. This, even though the OTC is defining the new STIP, they have established funding strategies and policies that are still in play here in thinking about all of this. They have an established investment strategy, and that flat line shows their desired investment for this pavement condition improvement effort. So still not all the money we need to do everything that needs to be done. That's an overview of some refresher of what we talked about in August, a little more new information. I'll stop there and ask if you have any questions of me or Franny.
Okay, questions?
Well, good. Again, thank you. This is, we'll be talking about this with the Lane Act next week. And again, we're preparing for the OTC workshop. We'll be advocating for this area as best we can. Commissioner Lycan be offering the OTC some investment recommendations that represent the needs of this community. We'll continue to be emphasizing the need for more money for Beltline. It's disappointing that money wasn't included in House Bill 2017, but we'll probably say something about the continued need to invest in those big facilities. We'll also be mentioning the interchange at I-5 in Coburg. That's another big priority for this community. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So I'm looking at the agenda. Where's Paul? Brenda? Yes, I'm looking at the agenda. We still have 50 minutes worth of stuff and 25 minutes worth of time. So looking for some help here, prioritizing.
Through this next one fairly quickly, and honestly, if we need to skip anything entirely, the performance measures one could be postponed for a month.
Okay, and maybe we should do that, and then the follow-ups are probably pretty short too, but I know that we do have a Comcast issue at the bottom that we need to take a look at too. Yes?
So,
yeah.
If you'd like me to, yes, I can move on to the next one. This next one is titled OTC Workshop. It really is in part a follow-up to the presentation of the 21-24 STIP and specifically gets into some of the feedback. So let me set up a couple things. First of all, as you said, or as Bill said, the ACT is meeting to discuss its input to the Oregon Transportation Commission's annual workshop later this month on the STIP and on other items. You obviously have a membership on the ACT, and so I want to know, as your representative on the ACT, what your thoughts are on a couple of things. In addition, the annual workshop, the OTC annual workshop on the 19th and 20th, for the first time we'll have the Oregon MPO Consortium at the table formally invited as part of the discussion with the ACT chairs. That's a step in the right direction. We've been trying to get a better connection between the MPOs and the OTC. This is a really good step that that OMPOC will have that position, that seat at the table in a couple of weeks, and OMPOC is meeting tomorrow, and we'll be discussing its viewpoints on these questions around the STIP and some other things at its meeting tomorrow. And again, your members from this body will be at OMPOC tomorrow. So in the packet, I have put what is the Lane Act's draft talking points, and I really wanted to have a little discussion around those. And if you will, in general, those talking points try to address some of the questions that are the OTC has asked the ACTs and OMPOC to give them feedback on later this month. Those three questions are in my cover memo. Basically, it says how should the Commission allocate and prioritize the funds between the various categories that you just saw on the slides. In particular, what's the appropriate split between fix-it, enhance, and safety, and what other programs should be targeted for funding. The Lane Act draft talking points here, I'm going to go very quickly. Start out by saying it's difficult to give input because we're only talking about charts that show proportionate views of things. We don't have real numbers. As one of the ACT steering committee members put it, or perhaps it might have been Commissioner Lycan, it's hard to know what we want to do with if it's $5 million or if it's $50 million or if it's $500 million. We don't know. We might have different answers depending on the level of funding. But these draft talking points talk about fix-it and safety are the two top priorities. So in other words, between the three biggest categories, fix-it being maintenance and preservation of the system, safety being obvious what it is, and the third big category being enhance, which is adding, building more. This says we prioritize basically preservation and safety over enhance. And on that, I'd like to know from this body. And maybe I'll stop with that.
Isn't there a strong argument that fix-it is safety, generally speaking?
Well, I think there certainly can be an argument in that. I've heard people, including some ODOT people, say that this is a safety component to every project. Talk about even enhance when it adds capacity and adds more lanes might make things safer because there's less congestion. That safety thing, I think, is important and can be emphasized in two ways. It can be emphasized in direct funding for specific safety projects, but also prioritizing safety whenever possible in other types of projects.
And the pie chart that we looked at showed fix-it a much larger slice of the pie than safety. So that's my point, is that we're not really abandoning safety by putting money into fix-it projects.
No, I don't think anybody is suggesting that safety is being abandoned, and as a matter of fact, HB 2017 did dedicate some funding off the top to safety, and a large part of what this is talking about the federal funding. How should ODOT use its federal funding? So certainly the state funding has directed more towards safety, and I would agree that nobody's thinking that fix-it is abandonment of safety. If there's not other comments on that, I will just continue through these real quick.
Actually, and just a question, if I may, Paul. Traffic control devices, such as if you added if you added traffic lights to an intersection, is that considered safety, or that's not enhancement, is it?
It's typically not an enhanced project, but it really depends on what the purpose of adding the stoplight might be. You can add a stoplight to improve throughput, which is somewhat enhanced. If you're getting more congestion or more flow through the intersection, you can add a stoplight for reasons of safety, a bad accident history at the intersection. So really, it could be a mix or one or the other.
All right.
That's a case-by-case basis, I think.
So Paul, maybe a follow-up question to that is, are they separate applications, or can you refer, you can do somewhat, this is going to fix something, but it's also going to improve safety, and
I think
I should look at the.
So the way that ODOT divides the money for fix-it and safety is, and safety for us is the all roads transportation safety now, which is multi-jurisdictional or all jurisdictional. But for fix-it, we look at pavement conditions, just like that chart, and how much is fair and better. And then we try to meet that performance measure. So it's really data-driven, and the same with bridge fix-it. Okay. It's all performance measured. They do inspections, they find out which ones are the worst, and they fix the worst things first. They also consider seismic in that whole mix, and the priority routes for freight and whatnot for seismic, and then they allocate the funding based on that. So it's not a formula, but it's all data-driven. And then the safety money with ARTS is also data-driven, and it's using that SPIS that we've heard about so much, the Safety Priority Index, which looks at fatalities and serious injury crashes, and then it looks at what kinds of fixes can be done for the best benefit, and then trying to make the best use of those funds to get the most benefit for safety.
Okay. Great. Yes, Gary, and then Lucy.
Whoever. Thank you. Just a follow-up question on it. These categories are not at all clear to me, and so is there like some definition of what is actually embraced by each of these categories?
Yes. There is.
There is.
And that can be provided as part of perhaps a further update on the STIP at the next meeting. We can definitely give further definition of those categories. And if I may follow up just real quick to what Franny was saying, the categories not only fund different things, but the way the funding, this is what Franny was getting at, the way the funding is determined, its use is determined, is different by category. So again, when you're talking about fix-it getting a lot of money, and that's important, it's something that we really would have no input on. It really is completely data-driven. There's no competitive grant program. There's no public input. Really, it's just an internal process, and it's a very good process, and it really does try and maintain the system. While the safety funding is largely data-driven, there's usually more opportunity for input, though. There's more opportunity for us to suggest where safety needs funding might be directed, and they will look at the data for those locations or those needs. And certainly when you're talking about enhanced, then you're usually talking about an even greater level of opportunity for input from us to ODOT about where to spend that enhanced money. One of the reasons, though, that Enhance isn't getting as much focus on the federal funding side, at least in these draft talking points and the ones I'm seeing from other acts around the state as they're developing them, is that, keep in mind, HB 2017 greatly increased the Enhanced type funding available from the state funds. It not only increased the money that's going into the earmark projects and other projects that ODOT will build, but it basically increased the city and county allocations out of the gas tax by about 50%. So the local jurisdictions will have more money to use for things that might be enhanced or other needs.
Yes, Gary.
I guess this is a question for you, Franny. Main Street and 42nd probably falls under safety more than fix it. Where do landslides, like on 126 and to the coast and stuff, where does that fall?
That's under the category of it could be two different categories. It could be emergency funding when it happens and you get federal money to restore your facility, and so that's emergency. Or it can be under seismic, because the landslides and the bridge is falling down is seismic, so that could be under fix it. Good question.
Great, thank you.
Typically, when you see ODOT go out and spend money on a landslide that's happened and they're cleaning it up and repairing the roadway, that's typically coming out of their operational budget. It's not federal funds. It's not the state funds out of HB 2017. It's out of their operational budget.
Okay.
We try to get reimbursed with the federal money for those.
Yeah.
Okay. Anything else? All right.
So the next point on here just says that the Lane Act agrees that Connect Oregon should be permanent. Again, it is still subject to being renewed every biennium, and there's a lot of entities that would like to see it be a permanent program. Again, it goes on to say that fix it and safety are the two top priorities. And then at the bottom of the first page, it talks about the Beltline project and the fact that it wasn't funded in HB 2017, and we still consider it to be one of the top priorities in this area. And the second page talks about a couple of other priorities. The I-5 interchange at Coburg is another high priority. That paragraph in there about Beltline and I-5 at Coburg are really, again, starting to position ourselves for that next 2-cent increment in the gas tax that will come around in 2020. That I mentioned a few minutes ago. The next bullet, first full bullet at the top of page 2 is something I've talked to you before about, which is right now the ODOT staff proposal is to develop a federal funding scenario that assumes a 10% decrease. We don't think that's adequate, and we think that it risks leading to what happened last time, where ODOT received more money than it had assumed and planned for, and how they spent that additional money, frankly, had almost no transparency and no opportunity for public input because it had to be determined within 60 days. And so not only our talking points, but OMPOC is going to be talking about this tomorrow, and in fact, Portland Metro has already sent a very strongly worded letter to the OTC talking about how the OTC needs to develop multiple funding forecasts and needs to provide direction to ODOT staff for a process with analysis and opportunities for input for spending any money above what is anticipated, not just doing it in, if you will, in a black box. And then the last bullet on here I already talked about, which is that Safe Routes to Schools allocation, 50% to a grant program and 50% to ODOT. There's some concern about that, and the Act is pushing back on that, and I expect OMPOC to also have that concern tomorrow. So I'll stop there. If there's any input to me for the Act meeting or to your OMPOC members for tomorrow's meeting
tomorrow.
Please give it to them now. Otherwise, we'll go with these.
Yes, yeah. So are there any issues with these being forwarded to the OMPOC at OMPOC? Okay. All right, great, thank you. Okay, so because I'm looking at the time and looking at performance measures, is that we put that.
We'll postpone it to the
next meeting. Okay, so follow-ups. Oh, no, darn, I'm so sorry. There's always.
Mayor, you'll get to hear it tomorrow.
Oh, okay, never mind. All right, okay.
At on pause.
Okay, so follow up and next steps, ODOT, you have ODOT?
Do we want to do cable next? No?
Oh, well, it depends on how we want to go
Different
back.
body, we have to change.
Oh, got it. Oh, okay.
Okay.
Um,
Oh, yeah.
I'll be real quick. I'll try to be really quick. I like to talk, but, so there's new daily Amtrak Cascade round trips between Portland, not unfortunately Eugene, but Portland and Seattle will begin December 18th. Just so you know, there's 2 new trips being added between the big cities. And the other thing is, I wanted to mention that the Beltline Highway, although we did not get funding for the $300 to $350 million needed for that project, we are doing an interim project, which is the Beltline Delta interchange. We're expecting that project to cost about $20 million. We're also expecting to replace the bridge, the Delta Bridge, which was previously not in our plans, but we think we have enough money for that. And this is all from your all good work of saving money from the Beltline interchange with I-5. And so we have at least something coming up, and we'll be in construction in 2019 for that project. We're also working on the NEPA. Pardon?
What's the bridge going to cost?
Well, altogether it's 20 million. I think the bridge itself would, I would just have to guess at this point. We didn't really call it out separate because it changed the ramp configuration and everything, so it's kind of a package. But I could find out specifically what the.
But the 20 million covers all of that.
Pardon?
The 20 million covers all
Yeah.
of that, the redoing of the bridge and the new configuration.
Right, yeah.
But it does nothing for Ayers Road and the City of Eugene developments north of that.
However,
I knew that.
the NEPA, the project, the facility plan, and the plans for the Beltline itself did take that growth into consideration in that, so when we were looking at the facility plan for the Beltline itself. So just so you know that growth was factored in.
Right. So what we need to do is get people from the neighborhoods to the interchange.
Right. Right. So we're going to be starting up the stakeholder group for that NEPA phase for our Project B, we call it, the big project, Project B. And that should be happening, originally I heard the end of October, but I think since I haven't heard much more about it, I think it's going to be more like November. We'll have a couple people from the City Council, Eugene City Council on that, LTD, the Commissioner Bozovich, and I believe Commissioner Farr, myself, and the planning manager from ODOT. I think that's what we have. So if I'm missing somebody, please let me know. And that's all I have. Thanks.
Well, I'm looking at Springfield Main Street safety update, but I'm thinking you all probably know more about it.
I can speak to that, Mayor, briefly. We had a good meeting on Tuesday. The City of Springfield staff, Lane Transit District, and ODOT, me, I was there. We have a revised scope of work that's fairly refined. We're just working through some of the details of integrating the LTD Main Street McVeigh transit study into that. We want to make sure that are all and that they're in parallel and that they make sense. So we're making good progress.
And who's our consultant again on that?
DKS.
Yeah.
Yes, and I think they're the ones that we met when we were going through the CMAQ process. They're the ones that did the CMAQ process.
I think so.
I think so.
Yeah.
I think so too. Yeah, I was okay with thumbs up so far. Great. Okay. Thank you. Rail, don't know if we have any rail.
Nothing in addition except for the 2 new trips.
An OMPOX meeting tomorrow, and we just did that mostly. Lane Act update?
You heard really the main part of what the Act's going to be discussing.
We do have a page with MTIP administrative amendments, attachments, and those are just for you to look at, yeah?
They are.
Okay. And next steps, agenda build, anything that we need to, no?
Mayor, if I can, I think I need to at least inform you one thing on the performance measures, if we have 3 minutes for it.
Okay.
And I just want you to know, we want to do a large presentation on the performance measures. There's a lot of work coming over the next couple of years for us. There's a whole series of performance measures. Just this morning, one of the performance measures has been published in the Federal Registration for being withdrawn. In particular, there's safety performance measures, pavement condition, congestion performance measures, all of that. The administration published in the Federal Register this morning notice of intent to withdraw the greenhouse gas performance measure and to eliminate that from the requirements. They cite, I think, in the several pages in the Federal Register, two interesting sentences. One is that this performance measure was established as a policy direction by the prior administration. So they just flat come out and say why they don't like it. And number two, they say that removing this performance measure would save $11 million per year nationally in planning efforts to track the measure, which frankly is a drop in the bucket. But those are the two main rationales I can find in there. The reason I wanted to call it to your attention is because the notice, the opportunity to comment on this ends November 6th. So really, if you have any interest or any standing to want to comment on it, you need to do it immediately. Otherwise, the rule will be rescinded on the GHG measure.
You know, the EPA was a prior administration too.
Thank you, Paul, for bringing that to our attention. Okay, so next on the agenda is our Metropolitan Cable Television Commission. So I need to adjourn
The
this
MPC.
meeting. So I'm adjourning the MPC meeting, and for those who aren't part of the commission, feel free to take off and enjoy this beautiful day. And those of us that are on the commission, yes, Gary.
I know I'm not part of the commission. I learned that the first year on here. I just wanted to say that MX West is in its 18th day of operation, and the ridership numbers are good.
Very good.
And I wanted to thank everybody who came to our opening event.
Well, we're very happy you're underway instead of under construction.
Yes.
Thank you very much. Okay, so just those of us that need to be here for the Comcast, and I need to gavel down on the Cable Commission meeting. Okay, so, and we have Ann here to talk about what's going on with our cable commission.
So my name is Ann Davies. I'm with LCOG, and LCOG staffs the Cable Commission. We also have a representative from Springfield, a representative from Eugene, and a representative from Comcast in the audience today. But because we only have 6 minutes, I don't want to spend a lot of time summarizing the memo that was already in your packet. That pretty much has the information that you need to know. We haven't been in front of you on this item for about 1.5 years. So we felt like it was time to give you a little update of where we were. And that summary is pretty much in the memo. We have the two issues are the fee review and the franchise renewal itself. And we've kind of combined those because the expiration of the current franchise is coming up. It's in 1 year, and we've been at this for a while. So at this rate, we just kind of need to keep things moving. So the issues that were presented 1.5 years ago, I'm sure you don't remember them unless some of you did your research to pull those minutes up, are not really the issues that we're concerned with now. There was some customer service issues and quality of the picture that have been resolved. So the issues that I've outlined in my memo are kind of the points that we're kind of going to Comcast to try to put into the franchise. And then the determination of the fee review dispute is ongoing, and the consultants have one view and Comcast has another view, and we're just trying to work through some of those issues with Comcast at this point. So if you have any questions about particular issues or process, I'm happy to try to answer them.
Yes, Commissioner Farr.
I do remember the problems from the questions from 1 year ago, and I'd be very interested, not necessarily today, but to hear how they were resolved, because there were some differences of opinion there, and so.
So one of the issues, I just know what I know from talking to people in the minutes because I wasn't around at that time, but customer complaints, and that issue was an issue with Comcast potentially or arguably not providing certain complaints in a timely manner. What we've determined to do is address some of those issues in the new franchise. So we'll be processes. Pam, did you have something on the, I mean, how it was going to be addressed in the new franchise, or?
You mean that is one center?
No, it's more the complaint issue.
And we don't need to go into detail right now, but I'm interested in making certain, because whenever there's a difference of opinion, I think we should hear what the resolution.
Well, from reading the minutes and the staff report and the information that I have, the difference of opinion was Comcast was saying no one ever asked us for those complaints, and the staff was saying that they weren't getting to them in an efficient time. So
we're retaining the language in the franchise. I think we're just going to boost it up so there's an enforcement mechanism that that the complaint records will be maintained.
So making certain that if Comcast or any other provider is being judged on something, then they have an opportunity to respond or to actually know what it is they're being judged on, so that they know the level of importance, or they know how to address it, or to report to you that it is being done.
It's fair for both sides for them to,
And the way the process, the complaints go through Pam at the City of Eugene. So she takes those in, and we haven't had an issue in the last year and a half. So to that extent that.
No big issues have arisen. The complaints come in because our phone numbers are listed on the bill under the Federal Cable Act. Mine happens to be on your bill for anybody living in Eugene and having.
Well, lucky you.
Yeah.
Well, they should be, by the way. But that's my opinion.
They're resolved generally very quickly by their dispute staff. Very, very competent, I would say.
And there was another issue that maybe somewhere in your recollection was the emergency system that was resolved. So.
And it's operable.
Pardon me?
It's operable.
It's operable.
And was it all, okay.
There was a period of time where it was not operable, and it was resolved. Yeah.
I'm surprised that the complaints have been more. It seems like every time I'm in a conversation with anybody that Comcast comes up and people just explode with frustration over their bills rising for seemingly no reason, jumping as much as $30 with no explanation. Hard to get back to find people to tell them why, and no rationale to explain these kind of situations, and it doesn't seem like Comcast has any kind of regulation as to control of their bills. They are not held to any kind of standard as, you can raise it, if franchise fees are going up, you can raise it $2. Not, gee, now your package expired and now you're $30 higher or $40 higher, and it's very, very loose.
Well, what we are dealing with through the franchise is basically the processing of complaints.
And there are rates, many of those rates that you're talking about are outside of local control, and they're either under federal law or they're not regulated. And that may be an issue that Comcast, I'm not speaking for Comcast, but I would think they would could give you a letter or a memo that describes their rate increase process and what they go through internally if they wish to share that with you. So
what do we do with unhappy people, unhappy customers? This is the only cable company, since they do have the franchise, people aren't happy with it. Where's the resolution?
You remember when we first had this discussion back in the 1990s, Pam? You staffed the committee, and somebody at the one time said that Comcast is the only game, or I think it wasn't called Comcast. TCR. It was, TCR, AT&T, whatever it was. It was the only game in town. And at that point I said, well, no, isn't there a satellite service also providing competitive
And then you have over the top, people are cutting the cord. They're going to Hulu, or they're going to other, when you're in a mobile society, competition, I'm not saying it's the most effective competition, but competition, I think Comcast is feeling it. So there are choices that are increasing for people.
And it has always existed, and the important thing for us to be able to do is to make sure that it's a level playing field for all people providing the same service. And if we're doing that, then we're doing our job.
Well, just to finish, my experience has been people are fairly satisfied if they have a reasonable answer to what's going on, not unreasonable answers of excessive increases.
Whether it be DirecTV, Comcast, Cape, whatever.
Yes. I try to provide, when they call me, a reasonable answer in working with Comcast. And I also have an interested parties list of folks who want to get notices of council meetings I might be at for the Comcast franchise renewal. So if they wish to come and speak, they can, and things of that matter.
So as you go forward now over the next year, the conversations you're having are the franchise agreement itself. So we're going to see what that is and where that's at periodically, so that we have input into what that discussion is.
So, I mean, I'd love to have feedback from you about what timeline you would like us to keep you updated, because we haven't been here in a year and a half, and not that much has happened in a year and a half. I mean, the staff did draft the renewal, so the new franchise, and that was shared with Comcast, and I think that was all done after the last time we met with you. So I could certainly, schedule to come more often now that we're in that last year.
Yeah, I would say typically, I know we would see something as an agreement is being negotiated. We would see it periodically, particularly when there's a major decision point. So I'm looking at everyone else's, what your comfort level is. Not every month, but certainly don't come in another year.
Right, when it's already done, yeah.
Yes, so maybe a couple of times.
Okay.
Check in with us and bring to our attention any area that you're trying to negotiate you would like not to get blamed for.
Right.
Let us be blamed.
Yep.
Okay. Does that sound good with everyone, or any other? Yes. Okay.
Okay, that's good.
Okay. Great. Thank you.
Thanks.
Okay. So.
Do we have control of how Pac-12 Network distributes their games? I don't like that camera angle sometimes.
That might be out of
Yeah, talk to Pam about that.
Okay, I'm going to close the Cable Commission meeting, and we're done. Thank you. Well, that was a pretty good save.
Excellent. Good job.
Council, which is.
Yeah, where you're
when
losing
it starts
time.
and when it's done, not just 30 days.